The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, good morning, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's call. My name is Jane Biddle. I'm from Vistaar Technologies, and we're a leading provider of price optimization solutions. I'm pleased to be hosting the webinar today and providing a presentation by Srini, Palanathy, and Ajay, Chidraver, both of Vistaar. They're going to be talking about your best moves for pricing success. We'll be running 3 polls throughout this session, and this is your opportunity to weigh in on some key topics. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the questions panel on your screen and just send them over. We'll take care of them at the end. Now I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker today, Srini Palanathy. He's Vice President of Business Consulting at Vistaar. Srini has close to 20 years' experience in the pricing and revenue management domain. He advises Vistaar customers on how they can rapidly deploy and achieve maximum value from their pricing solution. I will introduce Ajay in just a few minutes. At this time, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Srini.
Thank you, Jane.
Go ahead, Srini.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks to all the participants today. To set the context for the agenda, establishing the right processes and structures is important to drive sustainable and lasting change. So we'll start the session today with a process for benchmarking your organization and how you can think about these issues within your company's context. In the second part of the agenda today, Ajay will share some insights on various organizational model structures, how it works in practice, and how best-in-class companies execute for pricing success. Our topic is quite relevant for today because if you look at some of the issues that are on top of mind for executives, this is one of the surveys that's done by Duke and CFO Magazine, results reported in the first quarter of 2012. If you take a closer look at the burning issues on top of executive minds, pricing jumps out, both from a macroeconomic perspective and also within their own confines of the company's processes. This is not very surprising because for a lot of pricing practitioners, they all understand that of all the marketing instruments, pricing has the most significant, direct, and immediate impact on growth and profitability. If pricing is not aligned with company strategy and not well integrated into the company structure, there will be proliferation of rebates and discounts. As a result, there will be a lot of price inconsistencies. Pricing pressures will increase from the customers, and that creates a downward spiral on the margin. So in order to address these issues, a company must establish the right structures and decision-making processes and provide sufficient resources along the 3 dimensions: people, process, and organization and systems. So every company is at a different stage of evolution in this journey. And what I've done is, based on our experience working with different customers, classified them into 4 different stages. First is the nascent stage. Second is, as the companies evolve into what we call as the dawn of enlightenment. The next stage is the empowered organizations, and finally is the best in class. So in a few minutes, we'll conduct a poll. But before we launch the poll, I would like you to think about this question in terms of how where your company is along these 4 dimensions. And I'll explain each of the stages and what moves the companies can make to move to the next stage, and then we'll launch a poll. In the first stage of the pricing evolution journey, which we call as the nascent stage, these are the companies where pricing is really not on the executive mind. It's not a focus, and pricing is done more as a check mark. It tends to be more of a back office function from an organization perspective. From a process perspective, the pricing methods and the tools tend to be fairly limited and mostly cost-plus pricing. There's little focus on customers or competitors in order to figure out what should be the right pricing strategy. From a data and systems perspective, usually these companies don't have any good foundational systems or the data to analyze and conduct to track profitability. They may have visibility at a gross margin level, but beyond that, there's not much of a true profitability analysis. Now, for these companies, it is very important to identify the profit leakages so that they can plug those and drive executive awareness. The greater awareness there is at the executive level in terms of impact of pricing and profitability, that's one of the key ingredients to drive future changes in the organization. So once you identify the leakages, these companies can tighten up the policy, both in terms of the types of discounts and the rebates offered, link it more to pay for performance, so that the customer, the discounts that are being offered to the customer are actually measured and are quantifiable. Companies can establish guardrails and essentially move the pricing, drive a lot more awareness of pricing as a profit lever. So these are the companies that we see in the second stage, what we call as the dawn of enlightenment. These companies have tasted the price of, the benefit of having better pricing. And from an organization perspective, these companies tend to have more, there's a greater awareness of pricing at the executive level. Pricing is moving out of the back office function. From a process perspective, there are roles and responsibilities defined. There's typically a deal-desk operation that is enforcing the pricing and the discounting policies offered. They also tend to establish more targets and floors, so there's a proper escalation and review before a deal gets submitted to the customer. And from a systems perspective, the price execution systems may still be somewhat disconnected, but at least there is a standardized data and KPIs defined to measure the pricing performance to help plug the leakages. And for these companies, the next best move would be to establish a pricing council, where we have representatives from the different functions, because pricing is a cross-functional process. It interacts with product, marketing, finance, and perhaps even supply chain. So it's important to establish a pricing council where the representatives from each of these functions are discussing on a monthly or a quarterly basis the benefits that the pricing decisions are happening, and from a competitive perspective, what are the trends and insights that they are seeing in the marketplace. These help tighten up the types of discounts offered. They identify opportunities on where there is benefits to improve pricing, and as a result, that intelligence that is gained as part of this process can be executed through the field. It's also important to arm the frontline staff with the same kind of pricing intelligence that these teams have, so that they can engage in more value-based pricing discussions with their customers. The companies also tend to improve the granularity of the segment, the pricing segment, where the targets and floors are set, because if you set these guidelines at a very business segment level, in a very high level, granular level, the sales reps may not have the confidence in these guidelines. So it's important to go for targeted pricing segmentation approach, where you can identify the right peer group in the right context so that the pricing is appropriate. Companies need to establish more of a centralized repository so that you can analyze how these quotes, how the quotes are, what's the win-loss type of performance, in addition to just monitoring what the actual pricing is. And as the companies go through these negotiations with the customers, whatever intelligence that they gather about their competitors, that competitive intelligence needs to be centralized and synthesized so that it can feed back to the pricing executive committee, and it also feeds back into establishing more optimal targets and floors. Okay. So this is an organization where it's moved from the dawn of enlightenment to now greater alignment and accountability throughout the organization. So the next phase, which is what we see as the third phase, is the empowered organization, where there is pricing expertise built out throughout the organization. People understand what the right pricing frameworks are, how you establish the, from a value-based pricing perspective, what are the benchmarks that you would use. From a customer and competitive perspective, what should be the positioning for this particular company. Okay, the pricing functions collaboratively with the other departments from product, marketing, finance, sales, and so on. And the sales incentives are also aligned. typically the sales intelligence get aligned first at the management level in the sales organization and finally down to the sales rep level. The pricing is harmonized across the different customer segments. So there is a price consistency. There is the right type of price image and price positioning in the marketplace for the company's portfolio. And in terms of a deal request, you don't see as many unwanted deal escalations, and the incidence of special deal requests would typically come down. So these are the companies where they are, the pricing is well understood, the importance of pricing, and both the structures and the decision-making process is well defined. And from a systems perspective, they have well identified systems of record for code, pricing, price lists, guidelines, price books that need to be shared with partners or customers, and ultimately the contract. So there is no manual update to the negotiated pricing that could cause the pricing errors. And these companies also tend to invest more in predictive planning so that they can figure out what's the impact of price changes, not only for the particular account, but if the same sort of a decision is propagated across the different segments or markets, how does it impact? What is the exposure for one pricing decision at the overall portfolio level? So these are the companies where they, because they focus a lot more on value-based benefits to the customer and price the product accordingly, they tend to have essentially leverage pricing as more of a strategic growth lever and identify new business and product opportunities that help drive the organization further ahead. They tend to also be a lot more sophisticated on the pricing side, and you in fact see the the true principles of revenue management in practice, where you have the right product at for the right customer at the right time in the right context. Okay. So the next stage is ultimately the best in class, where you have the organization, from a leadership perspective, you have a chief pricing officer in a way where they have a stake. They have a seat at the table in the executive decision-making process. Working in pricing organizations, it becomes a very important step, from a career progression perspective, to move up to higher levels. The culture and the importance of pricing is recognized by these companies. From a process perspective, the value-based pricing methods are completely baked in. It not only affects, the concepts are not only embedded in pricing, but also new product introductions, the go-to-market initiatives, the communication, both to partners and channels. It's baked in everywhere. And these companies tend to have very specific targets as part of their annual business planning process on how much of growth will be driven because of price increase. You can always increase revenues and the total profit dollars by trying to increase volume, but there will be explicit goals around price improvement baked into the business planning process. And these organizations also tend to have very good processes in terms of continuous refinement. So they're learning from past and trying to be adaptive. And from a systems perspective, they tend to have fairly good, robust systems that are not only architected for what the processes have been in the past, but to adapt for the future. They're able to read the changes in the market conditions. They're able to rapidly simulate the impact of those changes, make quick internal decisions, and execute and exploit the opportunities that the market might present itself. So these are the 4 stages that that we've seen for companies to be in different stages. Now, this type of a benchmarking could be done within your own company in order to create a case for pricing transformation. What you do is, this is a fairly simplistic approach what we're illustrating, but you can build on this and internalize it and make it your own. Along with 3 dimensions from an organization, process, and systems perspective, you identify what are the critical factors for success within your organization context. Assign the weights that are important for each of these factors. You rank the importance of the factors based on 1 to 4, essentially identifying what stage each of these is within your company. Then you arrive at a balanced score, and then you can use that to start driving conversations at the management about, where is the opportunity, because it's not just creating a simple business case that, this is the opportunity, but you have to kind of look at it holistically to make a case for how to drive and make this price change sustainable for the longer term. So at this point, I'd like to ask each of you to poll where your company is in terms of these different stages of evolution. So the first option is the Nascent, which is stage 1. The second option is Dawn of Enlightenment, which is what we call as stage 2. The third stage is the Empowered Organization, and the fourth stage is Best in Class. We'll give about 30 seconds to collect the poll responses. So it looks like I think we have the responses back, and about 50% of the companies are in the stage 2, and about a quarter of the companies are in stage 1, and the rest of the companies are in Empower and Best in Class. And roughly less than 10% of the pollers have identified that their companies are Best in Class. And that this kind of a distribution is typically what we see what we have expected as well, because pricing is just becoming a lot more important, and most companies tend to be in stage 1 or stage 2. So I'll hand off to Ajay to talk about how best-in-class companies execute.
Hey, thank you so much, Srini. That was great. Now I'd like to introduce you to the second speaker, Ajay Chidraver, Senior Vice President of Professional Services. Ajay manages our services and support team that works with customers to ensure that they're leveraging price industry best practices and the latest technologies to get most out of their Vistaar investment. So at this point, Ajay, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Srini. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are. Srini covered the 4 stages of pricing. I'm going to cover the next 2 topics in a combination format and basically dive a little deeper into how best-in-class companies make it happen, right? How do they become best-in-class? I've organized this section into 4 topics that best-in-class companies are best at. Pricing function charter, the pricing organization to cover strategy through execution, how do they keep the pricing team motivated, and finally, what kind of technological capabilities do they deploy to instantiate all of this. The best-in-class companies take a holistic approach to the overall pricing process. These companies define a robust charter for the pricing function, spanning planning, execution, and tracking. Their charter typically calls for an integrated enterprise-wide pricing process and system. Right? Given that pricing is a cross-functional area in any company. Number 2, consistency between strategy and execution, which is, as you can imagine, very important. Number 3, closed-loop pricing process so that the feedback can be incorporated to improve the process. And this happens through cross-functional collaboration across marketing, sales, finance, demand, supply. Number 4, the process should be repeatable and leverage all the rich data that is available today and the latest technological capabilities. And finally, empowerment of the decision makers is key, and to be able to provide them actionable pricing insights in their specific context, whether it's setting the price list for a new product or all the way to helping a salesperson better negotiate a complex deal. It's important to have a charter like this as a guiding force. We have seen best-in-class companies revisit it at an annual frequency, do a status check, and refine it if required. So given this charter, the next question is how to actually organize the pricing function, right? Companies have dabbled in different approaches on organizing pricing, ranging from centralized to decentralized to everything in between. So let's look at how best-in-class companies are organizing their pricing function. So what we have seen is the following approach works best in these type of companies. So if I start on the top left, the planning part, works well when it is centralized, right? So this is where a core pricing team who's solely focusing on all things pricing, right? So the things that they are responsible for, right? To articulate the pricing philosophy based on comparisons between them and others in the market. Define pricing strategy based on top-level corporate goals. Elaborate process, roles, metrics, and guidelines. And then orchestrate the pricing process. Right? One of the key jobs is also to evangelize pricing within the organization. This is upward, down, and sideways. Right? Your peers, subordinates, and the management across departments. It's very important for this team. And finally, to evaluate the need for tools, data, systems, and implement the right one so that you can have a robust pricing function. The next is once you have the plan covered, the execution actually happens in a decentralized fashion, right? And this happens to the field and some oversight and support functions like sales operations. Here the key is to manage within the guidelines and any deviations through approval mechanisms like routing flows and deal authorization matrices, etc. The tools and systems are leveraged here to understand the impacts and then make the right decision. Then moving on, now that you've started executing, there has to be a tracking mechanism. And this is hybrid in the sense that the pricing team is involved as well as the decentralized execution team, which spans marketing, sales, and finance. And this is critical. So, because as the stakeholders are and systems are capturing information about the competition, about the market, about win-loss, right? All the metrics that are set in place need to be measured. Plan versus actuals have to be compared. So this learning from the data and the understanding of what worked and what didn't has to make its way back into the core pricing process, and we need to take near-term course correction. That's the sense and respond, as well as manage and change the overall strategy and process more from a mid to long-term perspective. Right. Now, to do all of this, the fourth key bucket is management involvement, and we have seen the companies that do it well. There is a lot of management time and visibility involved into the pricing process, right? Especially given the cross-functional nature of this process. Now, in corporations, we see there is always going to be misaligned metrics, corporate politics, fiefdoms. Given all of those things, the C-level management should be involved in right forums, whether it is pricing committees, meeting periodically, to help bring alignment amongst themselves and also to help do a top-down push to ensure support for the pricing transformation and remove any hurdles as the function and the company strives to make pricing the key growth and profit lever for the company. So next we will see two examples of best-in-class companies and how they have organized their pricing function. This is the first example. The business characteristics for this example are high product complexity, thousands and thousands of products, customers spanning small to very large customers, and you can imagine the deal sizes varying accordingly. The route to market complexity is high because they do direct business as well as lots of channel business. And then finally, the solution selling dominates as opposed to product selling. So it brings its own level of complexity in terms of product, services, bundles. The challenge really stems in this case from increasing competition and margin pressure. And the company is transforming from a, quote, I would call margin as a byproduct, unquote, to, quote, focus on margin, unquote. And hence, finance wanted to have more control over the pricing and discounting process. So in this case, the centralized plan, i.e. the core pricing team, sits within the finance organization, right? This is under the CFO. And it has influence on the execution and track part of the process through the marketing organization under chief marketing officer, and the sales organization under the chief sales officer or EVP of sales. Under finance, you can see the product finance team that supports the product pricing function under marketing, and also a sales finance team that supports the deal support or deal ops team that is part of the sales operations, helping sellers negotiate deals by making them empowered with pricing intelligence. And finally, the level of green in these boxes depicts how much influence does the pricing team have on that. What kind of interaction do they have with the core pricing team as they make those pricing decisions in the field. I'm going to now move on to the next example. So here, the business characteristics are low product complexity, hundreds of products, customers spanning mostly large channel partners, the route to market complexity is low, and finally it's more about product selling as opposed to solution selling. Now the challenge here really stems from the need to increase share of revenue, share of market, and manage it better through the channel partners. So in this case, the planning, again the centralized plan if you will, through the core pricing team is happening within the sales organization, right? As the objectives are very much a sales priority. And it has influence on the process through the marketing organization and the finance organization. So the pricing team works with marketing to define the product pricing, brand, there is brand managers involved here. And also, the pricing team defines the guidelines as part of the plan. Now the execution happens through sales, helping them better negotiate deals, and the regional finance managers provide oversight on sales, and they get their input from the pricing team. So in both these examples, the pricing team helps follow through all the way from strategy through execution. Okay? And it covers the gamut of planning, execution, and tracking. So with this, I'm going to switch to the polling question number 2. Okay, so the question here is, where does pricing sit in your company? Is it finance? Is it sales? Is it marketing? Or is it nowhere because you haven't figured it out yet? So if you can vote on your screens, and then in a minute we will see the results of this poll. So that's an interesting mix. Marketing is close to 60%. Wow. The second number is finance, and then finally sales. Okay, so we are going to move on to a few more slides that I have, and I'm sure the next topic is very interesting for this audience, especially as they look to define their pricing and then the pricing team. Not able to. So this is we thought a very interesting question. How do you motivate a pricing team, and how do best-in-class companies do this, right? So we looked at our customer base and the companies that do it best, and these are, call it the findings, the learnings, right? First of all, these companies take pricing very seriously, right? And they invest in really seeding the team, growing it, and empowering this team and building talent within that team, right? So what works for them? I'm going to comment on each of the items on the screen. So first is alignment with corporate strategy. That's important if especially if any one of you is trying to participate in such a team. Next is this team should have visibility to the top level management, the C-level folks, given the importance of pricing. Next, the staff in this team truly gets to work across functions. So that has to be highlighted, right? Just given the nature of pricing. And this will help anybody participating in the team eventually, because as they move in their career, they move to other departmental roles, whether in sales, finance, marketing, or demand supply, where their pricing knowledge will be valuable, and both from their perspective and the people who are hiring them. Next one, they need to be coached that they are really making real measurable difference to the company, right? So there is a bottom line difference that this team can make. Also, for the right talented folks, they need to understand that there is no dearth of challenges in pricing, in the pricing process, in the pricing system, and so you are intellectually challenged in terms of solving those problems, but it's an incremental process, and then there is more and more to be uncovered and more value to be generated by solving additional problems. So there is no challenge, no issue of somebody getting bored in this kind of function. Having data and tools, or at least a plan to have them soon, to make this team and make them effective at their jobs is important, right? Because without those tools and without the data, it's going to just be talk and process. Then the next one is, best-in-class companies also build on small success stories. So find those nuggets where you can make measurable differences, rather than trying to boil the ocean and take on big bang approach, which will be very, very challenging. Finally, given how critical and visible this function is, and the skills that are honed here, it needs to be highlighted that it is good from eventual job prospects and career growth perspective for these folks, both within the company and if they go into the broader market. And lastly, have some fun. Meaning, you could even send these folks to PPS conferences. So with this, I'm going to move to my last topic, which is about enabling technologies. So I'm going to walk through an evolution of how best-in-class companies excel at leveraging technology to create value in pricing. Right. So the first topic is data, and data is very key for any pricing initiative to become successful. Typically, data is scattered in various different systems across the company, from a master data perspective, CRM systems, which include quoting and deals, transactional data, which may be sitting in ERP systems, and even fragmented, competitive, market syndicated, point of sale data, right? So most companies do have these core elements of data, so they have the raw data that can be leveraged to do a good job at pricing. So what do companies do, right, to solve pricing problems? Now, if they don't have a system, then they're going to end up creating a hodgepodge mix of capabilities, right, depending on the level of sophistication and going back to Srini's, what stage of pricing you're in. Certainly, everybody leverages Excel. It's universal, I would say. Some companies will have business intelligence-based rudimentary reports that they start pulling in, so they have some idea from a process perspective, and they will try to get to some information. And the more sophisticated ones may actually dabble into some statistical analysis, right? So again, this will not take you to a best in class, and it is better than having no system, but not a substitute for having a comprehensive system. So best in class companies, they identify a need for a holistic pricing system, and they understand it is an absolute must to be able to extract more value from the pricing process. So let me kind of walk you through the key capabilities that best-in-class companies look for in such systems. Right? So the first one is data is key. Right? So the system needs to be able to access all available data and exploit it to the fullest extent. Meaning, there is no excuse today if somebody says that I don't have this data or I cannot make use of this data. Right? So the system should be able to really embrace that and able to exploit that data. The second is pricing analytics. It's a lot more than generic business intelligence, BI reports, right? It is about pricing analytics, not generic reports. It is about context-sensitive and actionable analytics, right? It should be in line to what either the salesperson or the marketing person or the brand manager is trying to achieve from a pricing perspective, right? And it should help drive decisions in their day-to-day, week-to-week life cycle. Okay. The next topic is, or next item would be, it should be holistic, right? It should cover everything from strategy to execution. So, there are processes that you do once a year, example, list price setting, and then there are processes that you do almost in real time, from when you are doing your quotations, you're negotiating on pricing, and evaluating scenarios. The next topic is pricing science and best practices. So a lot has been said about this. These can be good exercises. People involve management consultants or boutique consultants to develop processes or do one-time pricing science exercises. But the key is that you need a system that allows you to operationalize all of those across the company, right? It has to be tangible for if I'm an account manager sitting in Timbuktu and I'm making a pricing decision, then how do you take the science and operationalize it so that it makes sense to me? And that should, that is the core capability that the pricing system should allow for. Then the next is the system should support collaborative. Sorry. I think I hit the link. So I moved 2 slides forward. So I'm trying to get back to my slide. But I think people saw the picture. It was about data, tools, and a pricing system. And I'm going through, the key capabilities for a pricing system. So I'm just going to go through, there are only 3 items that I need to cover. They should support collaborative workflows, allowing for empowered decision making at the right levels in the organization for the right decisions, right? Then the next item was about having usable systems, right? So more often than not, we have seen that people try to fit their needs into whatever the system. Thank you. Whatever the system is allowing, and you have to adapt your business and your process to that system, right? Versus really making the system usable, and means that it should be easy to use. So it should, whoever is the user and whatever the task they are trying to achieve in their daily interaction with pricing, it should be extremely easy to use. Otherwise, especially your sales force, who is going to be very fickle, you're going to lose them, right? So adoption is going to be an issue. So I cannot underestimate the importance of this particular item in terms of driving adoption. And then finally, markets change, business changes, right? Competitors come in. Your business model, your product, everything keeps on changing. Even the corporate objectives might shift given this landscape change and the priorities change. So there are changes that impact the data, business, and IT. And the pricing system should be such that it can adapt to these changing systems. You cannot put in a system and expect that everything will work the same way for the next 5 years, right? So it should be very easy to change to these needs. So if I may summarize, the system should be flexible, configurable, extensible, and intuitive for it to help you succeed in your pricing initiative. So with this, I'm going to move on to the last polling question, and then we have 2 closing slides. So